Apart from working for Love Local Jobs, I also work for its sister company, which is a recruitment company called ICP Search. Recruitment is traditionally a very male-oriented environment, and we do struggle to attract women into recruitment. So I wanted to ask you what we can practically do to attract women to traditionally male roles like recruitment, tech, all the roles that are associated with being more male.
Okay, big question. I think there's a few things you can do, and where I would start is with your recruitment process and the data. I think somebody mentioned it earlier, but where are the women, where's the failure almost? So look at the data of, okay, from an attraction perspective, from each stage of the selection process, and I don't think averages necessarily work across the whole piece. I think you need to look at each stage and look at the gender splits, and are women falling out at a certain point? Yeah. Or is it the fact that there's just not enough women going into the funnel in the first place? And we've done quite a lot of work internally, so for obviously a very similar business from a recruitment perspective, in trying to change that model and trying to change what we found is that we weren't having trouble attracting women necessarily, or even getting them started, but that retention piece was where we were losing them. So the first sort of 0 to 9 months, really, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months is where we were
discovering the job wasn't for them.
And that traditional sales role wasn't suiting them, so we did a lot of work on exit interviews and then fed a lot of that back into our process at the starting point to make sure our interviews were more informative perhaps, to make sure our process was doing the warts and all piece, not trying to sell recruitment necessarily in its beautiful guises, but being the reality of, you're on the phone a lot. You've got to be able to prepare to have sometimes those difficult conversations. You have to be prepared for people to put down the phone on you. You have to be prepared sometimes people are rude to you. That having to open up some of those, the harsher realities, I suppose, but also framing the opportunities. So being more realistic about it, and that's helped us retain more women through that sort of first 0 to 9 months. Has it fixed the problem? Absolutely no, but it is helping to drive some of those numbers. So I would start with the data, looking where is your issue, and then once you've done that, go back to the beginning. So I think someone said it earlier, what does your employee value proposition look like? Is it female friendly enough? Is it male friendly enough if you've got the problem on the other side? So it's about gender equality, and that has to reflect through your website, has to reflect through all of your communications internally and externally. So there's no point projecting this huge image externally and then it not being a reality internally. And then through your job adverts, as Nikki was mentioning, there's a real focus at the minute on language, I've done a lot of studies on it because it sort of irritates me that words like competitive and strong influencer and things like that are more male driven. I consider myself to be relatively competitive and relatively strong, and yet it's proven time in time out and across industries. We're a multi-sector specialist in search, and we've tested it across all our sectors, and it really rings true that those words do turn women off, and yet the other way around, it doesn't turn men off. So it doesn't work the other way around. So when you use words like supportive and family environments, those sorts of words, it doesn't stop the men from applying. Mm-hmm. So actually it's about gender equalising your job adverts and the content on your website and all of those aspects. And then I think it's also about stating your commitment to it up front. I don't think there's anything wrong with, in your job adverts, stating your commitment to diversity and inclusion on whatever level.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. How can we ensure a fair selection process for women and men wishing to progress to ensure we promote the absolute best people for the job?
I don't think anybody wants tokenism, and nobody wants to be that, one woman because, and that was reflected in your video earlier. But I think that's tough. I think it is a tough reality. Somebody mentioned earlier blind CVs. We do that with certain clients that have wanted us to look at specifically their gender splits, and in some cases their ethnic minority splits and things like that. And so we've taken names off CVs and done it that way. We've also done the 50-50 shortlisting.
Yeah.
I think that's about a really open conversation about once you've got your attraction levels right, what's the next stage? Unconscious bias training. That's happening a lot with some of the bigger corporate clients that we're working with, but it's not necessarily happening further down into the hiring manager loop. That's what we've found. It's happening a lot at director level, perhaps, even at senior manager level. But when you're there with a hiring manager who might be on the factory floor or might be in a depot, that's where they haven't had that training, and they're recruiting like for like. So it's about, from our perspective, it's about working with our clients to make sure that there's the right interview panel, that the right people are talking the right language, and all of those things to make sure that those selection processes are as fair as possible to get the right people through the door. But I also think in some cases, and we don't have a lot of clients who are prepared to be brave enough but to look at job design, and in terms of turning the conversation on its head, is it something that, if you're really having an issue recruiting women and retaining women, do we need to look fundamentally at the jobs that you've got on offer, and are they attracting females in the right way? Are they retaining females in the right way? Probably not. So what does that mean? How can you change that? And some of that's about flexibility, some of it's about what do women need to be able to do that job in the right way, and it's about women being able to bring all of their skills and attributes to the table, not necessarily having to do that job really well, but be a man to do it.
Yeah, we've done quite a lot of work on job design lately, but I don't think I've done enough, really. And some of the tips that I picked up just today have been brilliant, so they'll help. You mentioned unconscious bias, and it's been mentioned a couple of times already today, and I've actually done a test before and was slightly surprised at the results. What do you think can be done about unconscious bias and how it negatively impacts certain groups, women?
Well, I think the thing is with unconscious bias training is what it tells you is where your bias may or may not lie, and it is unconscious, so you can't train it out of someone. I think that's the big learn with unconscious bias. It's not something that you can necessarily change, but what it is about understanding what your bias is and therefore being able to control it and fight against it almost. So it's an education piece around where might your business be, and that comes back to what I started with that data piece. If you are finding that women aren't coming through the process and yet they're in at the top, they're in the funnel at the top, they're coming through your application process, but they're not getting through to maybe senior roles, or they're not getting through at a certain level, then you probably have got some level of unconscious bias in the organisation. So how do you address that? It's about recognising it and then fighting against it, and that's you can't necessarily change the bias of those people. You've got more people in the room, but they'll have their own unconscious bias. So it's about making sure that you are balanced and pushing against that bias all the time.
It's a challenge from an HR person's point of view, I think, just with many of the managers and leaders that I dealt with in my time, to try and get them to drop unconscious or conscious biases, in fact.
That's a whole different
That has happened as well, yes.
That's where HR takes over and marketing steps away.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely challenging at times. So, this has been covered to some degree already, but it'd be useful to get your thoughts as well. How can we embed a diversity and inclusion strategy so it's not just a piece of paper or a policy in a handbook?
Yeah.
That's a big question.
Yeah, I don't know that there's an easy answer to that, or a really specific one. I think you have to live it. So we've worked with a big construction client on working on a program called My USP. So a bit of a play on that U bit, but that was specifically designed to, not dissimilar to the Accenture piece, to look at where people felt they needed more, to be included. So I think sometimes diversity and inclusion is a big thing, isn't it? It's a big, huge program, and many businesses will say they're committed to it, but what does that actually mean you're doing? What are you actually doing to do that? So by driving it from almost the bottom up and getting every individual in this huge engineering company to look at what their own personal USP was and how they'd like to see what they could bring, how they could bring that to the table in their role at work. We tried to almost change the conversation and go the other way, so it wasn't just policy driven. It was more about what are our employees' skills, natures, personal traits that they feel they can bring to the table, and how can we make that work within our diversity and inclusion strategy rather than the other way around. And that's really the only practical example I've got of a business, of working directly with a business that's doing that really well. But it is that live it and breathe it. You know, it used to be all be about values, didn't it? That was the previous sort of iteration of this. And I think that, you know, making sure it's not just posters on a wall. You know, is it part of your performance process? Is it part of the hiring process? Is it part of the exit process? You know, how many people are we losing and why, and what, you know, which values are we not representing in that process?
Yeah.
So I think all of those things can tie together to make sure it's more than a piece of paper, but it needs full collaboration. You know, if you've just sat as a HRD or as a marketing director on your own trying to push that through, it's never going to work. It's still going to remain that piece of paper for all the good ideas you might have around it. You need full buy-in, and you need that business outcome piece of, if we do this, what's the outcome for the business? What's the reason that I need you, commercial director, you FD, whatever it is, to buy into this? I think that changes the conversation.
Influencing senior management is certainly a part of it. Okay. Returning from maternity leave, how can we support women returning from maternity leave better, and in general helping parents balance work with family commitments?
Yeah, then that goes back to what I was saying about job design, I think, to a certain degree. I think it's about asking women what it is they need. And somebody mentioned ambitious earlier, and I think everybody would say they're ambitious, but sometimes you have to be ambitious on your terms. You know, if ambitious means I have to do global travel and I have to be here, there and everywhere at all hours, I've got a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, that's not a reality for me. So what does ambitious mean to me? Yes, I'm ambitious, but it has to be on my terms. And I think that's an important factor for women returning from mat leave, both if you've got existing women who are coming back, but also trying to attract those women. So attracting women returners is a huge piece of work for a lot of organisations that we work with. You know, how can you make that work? And it is about, of course, it's about flexible working, but in a variety of different ways. So is that term time? Is that you know, is it compressed hours? Is it working job share? So there are so many different ways to flexible working that's not just, I want to work 3 days a week, and it might be, but there needs to be that creativity, I think, alongside it, and that's where women can really help that conversation as well. What do I need from my employer to make this work for me? So for me personally, I have to be out the door at 5 p.m. So that's my sort of mission in life, is to be out the door by 5 p.m. That means I get to bath and bed my babies and I can log back on later. But no matter what's happening, assuming I'm not in Gatwick Airport, I have to be out the door at 5 p.m. And that, for me, that's what I need to make my job and my life work. But for different people, it's different things. Sometimes it's location-based. Sometimes it might be title-based. Sometimes it's money. You know, what is it that you need to come back to work and for it to be a good place to be?
Yeah.
Obviously you'll be able to talk much more knowledgeably about me about HR policies and support transition back into work and all of those things. I think people are better at that side of things than almost just that first conversation of what do you need.
I think communication during maternity leave is particularly key, so people don't suddenly walk back in after 9 months of no communication. So I've spent lots of time working with my line managers to make sure they're communicating with people who are on mat leave and keeping them updated.
And regaining confidence. So, for me, coming back from maternity leave, some of it was about that. Building back that confidence to come back into a big job. How do I do that? How do I step back in as a new mum? What does that mean for me? So I think helping people to have that conversation and not hiding behind it.
Yeah. So gender equality, as we've heard today, has been making slow progress, potentially even going backwards. What do you think can be done over the next, in the shorter term, 10 years?
I think a lot of this has been said, but influence needs to start earlier. Starting in schools and starting those conversations earlier. So Julia's niece, doesn't want to go and have babies at 13. Making sure that the conversation isn't necessarily about work or babies, but about having a fulfilled life and what is it that you want to achieve. And do you know what? It's okay to not want to be a CEO. That's okay too, but it's okay to want to, and to have that equal share. I also think, I've just lost my thread, sorry. I also think it's about female ownership a little bit. I think that we're all in this room, and that's a hugely positive thing. Even putting on a conference that's about attracting and retaining female talent is a positive move forward. But as Mary said earlier, some of this is society based, and that's going to take a significant time to change. But it's about not being overawed by that, and everybody taking the small steps that they can to make this happen. The Davis report that was done in 2015 famously, gave the target of a third of women to be in senior roles by 2020. A third of, if I'm not mistaken, we are 50% of the human race. Why are we targeting a third? That just doesn't make any sense to me. So, not living by these sort of. No, I'm not saying that a third wouldn't be positive, because of course it would be a step in the right direction. But it is that. Okay, so we get to 33% and we've won. No, we haven't. So I think it'll be a continued battle. I think it's ongoing, and I think it's about being creative and making sure that you are almost keeping your eye on the next thing. This mentoring, this coaching, all of that's been covered brilliantly by the ladies on the panel before. But what's the next thing that we could do? What is the next creative idea that's coming out there that might help, whether it's women at 13, whether it's women at 23, 33, 53, to have that career that they want to have.
Yeah, and I shall be educating my sons.
That too, me too.
I think I've put you on the spot enough there, Janine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Should we be opening up to the floor? Should we open up questions to the rest of the floor?
Yes, let's do that. So, hands going up already. We'll just get you on mic. Thank you.
I'm Lorna. I work at East London College in Hill. I just wanted to ask you, so you mentioned about coaching and supporting people when they're coming back from maternity leave. I suppose it's more from an agency perspective, which is yourself, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, good. How do you coach employers or your clients to deal with on people's CVs where they've either got career breaks or maternity leave or took time off to care for or look after children or maybe elderly parents? How do you try and coach your clients and then, I suppose, encourage them to not see that as a negative?
Yeah. I think we've got some clients who are much more open to it than others, and for some clients that's a target audience, which is a huge positive. For clients where it's not, and it's more of a restriction, it comes back to obviously trying to influence and trying to do that at the right levels. But I think sometimes it's been, for me personally, it's been about trickery to a certain degree. What can we present about the person that almost that maybe doesn't hide it. I'm not on about lying, but that doesn't front that as the first piece of information that they see. So they almost bullet point the key skills that are perfect for the job, talk them all around that first, and it does tend to be about personal conversation, I would say, in my experience, and that's worked better for us than trying to do this by email or by any other form. So that face-to-face piece of, we've got this great person, here's all the reasons why, and have them bought in before they see the CV with the gaps and all of those things. Not that that's a negative and shouldn't be seen as a negative, but almost if you've got that difficult client that doesn't want that. And we've got a big client up in Glasgow who doesn't want CVs where candidates are too jumpy. That's their phrase, jumpy, I don't want jumpy. And I'm like, but what do you class as jumpy? If somebody's been in several temp roles and they see that as their career choice, of course they'll be jumpy because they'll have had more than 1 to 2 jobs this year. Absolutely. But they see that as a positive. The candidate sees that as a huge positive and what they're bringing to the role. You're seeing it as a negative. So I think it's about trying to obviously continue to push that. And I say to my guys a lot, try and push that 10%. So if that client in particular says 1 to 2 jobs a year, can we get them to 4 to 5 jobs a year? And then, do you know what? In a couple of months when that's working, let's get them to 6 to 7. that's so trying to marginal gains, if you like.
Generational thing as well, isn't it?
It can be.
Like people staying in jobs for
That's the whole, 30-year career. Whereas, the gig economy and all of those things, that's just not necessarily people's life anymore.
Jamie, we've got a question at the front here.
Run, Jamie, run.
Thank you. So mine's really not a question, it's more of an observation just on this point about CVs. I think there's an opportunity as part of resourcing and recruitment functions to try and get people away from utilising CVs. One thing we're trying to do at the moment is to have some quick key questions for hiring managers which actually focus on behaviours and skills and actually not show CVs in any way, shape or form, so actually they're making informed decisions then, as opposed to just being focused on what's in someone's CV. So that was just an observation, but now I've got a mic, I will ask another question.
Do it.
You talked about testing for unconscious bias, and I was just wondering whether or not there was a particular methodology you might have used or something we could learn from.
It was actually a test I found online. I can't remember what it was called, but you could pick, it was a couple of years ago, so I can't remember it properly, but you could pick different things like sex, race, age, you could pick different categories. It's a really long, a fairly long test, and it flashes pictures up at you and makes you pick emotions while you're looking at the pictures. It's quite weird, but it is very telling. And as Janine said, it's not necessarily something you can train. If something's kind of, you've grown up in a way or something's inherent in you, and no matter how much consciously you don't want to be like that, if it's unconscious, subconsciously in there, at the very least it makes you recognise that and fight it. So it was useful, but I had to try and find out what it was. It's just something I found online, which I just did out of interest. I think I was chatting to someone about it, and but I'd recommend it for people who think, no, what? I'm not biased.
I think your point on the lack of CVs is a really good one, and there are different ways people are doing it now with video and things like that. I think sometimes that plays to unconscious bias, though. It's finding that balance in the right way, and it is something that going back to the job adverts that we talked about briefly, is I try and avoid that bullet point list of requirements. Because if you sell the job well enough, then you don't need that requirements list, and it's proven time in and time again that women want to make sure that they've got to hit 100% of those requirements. And frequently the client doesn't need 100% of those requirements, or sometimes those requirements are just words for words sake. So you might be searching for a customer service advisor that is brilliant at customer service. As your first bullet point, what's the point of that? Nobody's going to self-select after that. So I think we try and avoid that requirement piece, to try and avoid that where people self-select out for that purpose. You focus on the skills and also the outcomes that person will have and accomplish in that role, and then you find out the people that want to do that and accomplish that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, hold on, just one moment. We've got some millennials at the back of the room who I'm sure are Googling unconscious bias as we speak, and will probably already have found the one that you're talking about.
Yeah, I would recognise it. Yeah.
I'm sure they're doing that. We do have time for one more question for Helen and Janine. So, which one have I missed?
Did you have a question, or were you stretching?
No, it was just
thank you.
Business Institute is the unconscious bias training, and Facebook has some great free.
Thank you.
Yeah, say that again.
Business Institute have got some great self-tests that you can do on unconscious bias, and Facebook have actually released, so you can publicly download them, all of their unconscious bias training, which they actually run in the organisation. They're all great presentations to watch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We've got time for the super brief question, please. So, thank you so much.
Not so much a question as a recommendation, really.
Okay.
We weren't really sure where to start, and we found that doing a recruitment audit was a really good place to start. It's a bit of a plug for an organisation called the Equality Academy. So it's not just specifically looking at the men and women issue, it's looking at equality as a whole, and looking at all of your recruitment processes to see where you might have unconsciously built things in that continue the same practices. So, for example, if you had a scheme about referring a friend, are you just bringing more people the same as the ones you've got in your organisation in? So it's definitely worth having a look at their website. It's the Equality Academy. It's run by a lovely lady called Razia.
And
I think similar to that is if you've got a specific audience that you struggle with, that doesn't necessarily need to be women, but then, you know, that you don't traditionally get applications from, or, you know, don't want to join your business, is open up a conversation with that group. You know, get to the networking events, those sorts of things, and have an open conversation with that group about what might be missing from your organisation. You know, what is stopping them, what in the recruitment process, what in the advertising process is stopping them wanting to apply.
The ACAS model workplace is another great audit tool as well, just for really kind of simple diversity strategy formulation. It's a really good way of assessing your organisation. So.
Great stuff, ladies. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Please give